What if the most powerful manipulator in your life never touched you at all? Not a slap, not a scream, not even a command, just a pause, a smile, a silence at the perfect moment. And somehow you changed, you adjusted, you gave in, without ever realizing why. This video isn't about villains. It's about the kind of control you don't even notice while it's happening. Today, we're going to uncover a form of power that's rarely talked about, almost never questioned, and yet, it's shaping your decisions, your emotions, and your identity more than you think. Visualize this. You're in a room with someone you love. They don't yell, they don't accuse, they just say, do whatever you want. But their tone, their body language, their sudden stillness, it's enough to make your stomach drop. So you don't do what you want, you do what keeps the peace. And that is touchless manipulation. Why do we call male assertiveness control, but female suggestion intuition? Why do we romanticize emotional withdrawal, passive aggression, and social triangulation when they cause the same psychological damage as overt dominance? That's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to hear. Influence doesn't have to be loud to be lethal. This isn't just about relationships, it's historical, biological, cultural. From Cleopatra to TikTok, from ancient queens to modern hot girl privilege, we're tracing the evolution of soft power, the kind that seduces through suggestion, punishes through silence, and leaves you questioning your own thoughts while they never raise a hand. So ask yourself, how much of what you've done or did you really choose? If you're brave enough to find out, stay till the end, because once you see how invisible influence works, you won't be able to unsee it. There's a kind of power that never raises its voice. It doesn't demand attention, it doesn't break things, and it doesn't threaten. It simply waits, smiles, withholds, suggests. And in that quiet suggestion, it bends reality more effectively than force ever could. Think about it. How many times have you changed your behavior not because someone told you to, but because of what they didn't say? A glance, a silence, a slow withdrawal of warmth. This is the paradox. We associate power with dominance, yet the most enduring control often comes from subtleties we can't explain, from the discomfort of not being acknowledged, from the praise we never received, from the affection that once came freely and then didn't. The world teaches us to look for power in the loud, the aggressive, the dominant. But what if we've been missing the quiet manipulations all along? The kinds that leave no fingerprints, just feelings. Guilt, confusion, longing, compliance. This is not about villainizing anyone. It's about seeing clearly. Because in the spaces where physical touch is absent, emotional influence becomes the weapon of choice. And when it's skillfully used, intentionally or not, it can reshape relationships, decisions, even identities, without a single word spoken. From dating games to childhood dynamics, from workplace tension to romantic seduction, emotional manipulation is all around us, but we rarely call it that. We call it charisma, intuition, femininity. We call it natural. But what if it isn't? What if what we call natural is actually strategic? Not planned like a chessboard, but deeply embedded into how certain people learn to survive in a world where direct power is discouraged, but results are still expected? You don't have to hit someone to hurt them. You don't have to speak to silence them. You don't have to touch them to control how they feel. You only have to understand what they crave. And that's where invisible power begins. History's silent weapon. History remembers kings who conquered with swords, generals who razed cities, dictators who ruled through fear. But rarely does it remember the ones who never picked up a weapon, yet bent entire empires to their will. Because in a world built by male dominance, where women were often denied formal power, a different kind of influence had to evolve. Not the kind that shouts orders, but the kind that whispers suggestions. It begins in ancient Rome, where courtesans weren't merely lovers, they were strategists. Educated, socially agile, emotionally observant. They didn't storm gates, they slipped through them, draped in silk and secrets. Their currency wasn't gold or blood, it was access. Information, proximity to decision makers, and with a well-timed glance or a whispered phrase, they could shift the fate of policies or poison an alliance. Fast forward to Cleopatra, often caricatured as a seductress. But look closer and you'll see a woman who spoke 9 languages, ruled Egypt through Roman occupation, and outmaneuvered some of history's most cunning men. Her power wasn't just in her presence, it was in her perception. She mastered the art of suggestion, not a threat, not a demand, a promise of something more, always just out of reach. And what about the royal courts of Europe? Beneath the polished etiquette and powdered wigs was a ruthless battlefield of influence. Women excluded from statecraft learned how to wage emotional and social war. A smile at the wrong moment could exile a rival. A well-placed rumor could collapse a household. The salons of Versailles weren't just places for conversation, they were arenas of unseen combat. These weren't isolated anomalies, they were survival strategies, because when physical dominance is denied, emotional dominance becomes the weapon. Look to the mythic Helen of Troy, whose face launched 1,000 ships, or Lady Macbeth, whose whisper in her husband's ear stained his hands in blood, or Mata Hari, the dancer turned spy, who blurred seduction and espionage so flawlessly that her true loyalties are debated to this day. None of them ruled nations, but all of them influenced men who did. And that's the essence of soft power, shaping outcomes without appearing responsible. It operates through emotional leverage, not law, through suggestion, not command. It's invisible in the records, but undeniable in its effects. And here's the haunting part. Many of these women didn't manipulate out of malice. They manipulated because it was the only power they were allowed to have. Influence became armor. Subtlety became strategy. Emotional mastery wasn't a luxury, it was survival. So while history praises the men who conquered lands, it often forgets the women who conquered minds. And they didn't need to touch you to do it. They only needed to make you believe it was your idea all along. The psychology of indirect control influence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it doesn't speak at all. It nods, it pauses, it disappears just long enough to be missed and then returns, sweeter than before. This is not the manipulation of villains. It's the quiet recalibration of perception, trust, and reality. And in many cases, it's not even intentional. It's intuitive, socially reinforced, psychologically potent. Let's start with one of the most disorienting tools in this arsenal, gaslighting. It doesn't scream, it suggests. It whispers just enough doubt to make someone question their memory, their instincts, even their identity. You say, "I feel like something's wrong," and they reply with a smile, "You're just being dramatic." You remember a moment clearly, a glance, a shift, a cold silence, and they casually erase it. Over time, your reality becomes negotiable. This isn't always done to harm. Sometimes it's a form of emotional self-protection, a way to avoid confrontation, to deflect blame, to stay in control without appearing cruel. But the result is the same, power without accountability. Then there's coquettish behavior, the psychology of pulling in by pulling away. Seduction not through touch but through tension. One moment, warmth. The next, distance. The unpredictability creates emotional volatility, and with volatility comes investment, because unpredictability is addictive. A study in behavioral psychology showed that variable rewards delivered inconsistently create stronger emotional conditioning than predictable ones. Think slot machines, or relationships built on hot and cold attention. Men in particular become susceptible due to attachment vulnerability. From an evolutionary standpoint, men are wired to pursue signals of potential mate interest, and the inconsistency of these signals triggers a powerful mix of arousal, confusion, and competitiveness. It's not just about sex, it's about validation, about chasing that first spark again, about restoring emotional equilibrium with someone who's always just slightly out of reach. But it doesn't stop there. Weaponized silence is another classic, not confrontation, not discussion, just withdrawal, affection withheld without explanation, smiles that vanish mid-sentence, messages left unread. This silence says more than any words ever could because it triggers one of our deepest psychological fears, rejection without reason. And the more uncertain the cause, the more obsessed we become with regaining harmony. Social psychology calls this the interpersonal control effect. When someone silently withdraws, our brains interpret it as a threat to our social standing or emotional survival, and we'll do almost anything to restore connection, even if we weren't at fault. Now let's look at social manipulation, the invisible war fought in whispers inside, glances and careful positioning. This includes triangulation, turning others against each other, exclusion, withholding inclusion as power, and reputation games, planting subtle doubts that erode social trust. It's not loud or direct, and that's what makes it so effective. Because if you confront it, you look paranoid. If you call it out, it sounds like drama. And so the manipulator retains the high ground, emotionally untouchable, socially protected. But perhaps the most subtle and most dangerous tactic is emotional mirroring. We are biologically wired to trust people who reflect us, our values, our humor, our emotional patterns. Thanks to mirror neurons, we experience emotional resonance with those who match our vibe. And many women, consciously or not, master this reflection with astonishing precision. They mirror your speech patterns, your dreams, your wounds, your sense of us. And in doing so, they bypass skepticism, because when someone feels like you, it's hard to believe they could ever betray you. You bond deeply, fast. But you're not bonding with who they are. You're bonding with the version of yourself they've projected back to you. To truly understand this, we need to go deeper into Jung's concept of anima and animus. According to Carl Jung, every man carries within him an unconscious feminine archetype, the anima. She is intuition, emotion, mystery. When a woman reflects this ideal back to a man through emotional mirroring, spiritual allure, or symbolic seduction, it activates something primordial. The man doesn't just fall for her, he falls for the part of himself she awakens. This is not deceit, it's mythic, it's archetypal, and that's what makes it almost impossible to detect or resist. Pair that with Carl Rogers' theory of self-image versus perceived image, and you see the trap. We fall in love not with people, but with how they make us feel about ourselves. And those who master indirect control know this, whether they've read the theory or not. Modern evolutionary psychology takes it even further. The sexual strategies theory suggests that women, having evolved under more limited reproductive windows and greater risk, developed more psychologically sophisticated tools for securing loyalty, status, and resources. Whereas men evolved to act, women evolved to influence, not by confrontation, but by curation, of perception, of emotion, of desire. This doesn't mean every woman is manipulating, but it does mean that our cognitive architecture has made us vulnerable to subconscious influence, especially when it looks like affection, because the scariest kind of control is the kind that feels like love. Modern femininity, performance or power, 700 words. Step into the modern world, a place where influence is measured not in military ranks or political office, but in followers. Where the battlefield has shifted from courts and kingdoms to curated feeds, filtered lighting, and captioned emotion. Where power isn't declared, it's aestheticized. Welcome to the era of soft manipulation as lifestyle. And it's called empowerment. But is it? Today, femininity isn't just a biological trait or a personality, it's a brand. And brands are crafted with precision. Swipe through Instagram and you'll see the same faces, tilted heads, parted lips, sad eyes framed by fierce captions. Healing, evolving, unapologetic. But zoom in and you'll find something strange. Vulnerability, that somehow always looks beautiful. Authenticity, that somehow always sells. Empowerment, that somehow always leaves someone else chasing approval. Let's begin with the concept of hot girl privilege. It's not about arrogance, it's about access. Research shows that physically attractive women are more likely to receive job offers, higher tips, lighter criminal sentences, and significantly more digital attention. But what happens when that attention becomes leverage? What happens when the smile isn't warmth but bait? When beauty isn't confidence but currency? In social dynamics, ambiguity becomes a tool. You're never sure if the compliment was sincere or strategic. You're never sure if the story was shared or deployed. And in that uncertainty, people bend, they flatter, they chase, they give, not because they were told to, but because they weren't. Now enter the world of female influencers. Their power doesn't come from yelling, it comes from inviting you in, to their healing journey, to their messy morning routine, to their real talk. But what looks raw is often rehearsed. What feels spontaneous is highly structured. because emotional resonance is the product, and you are the buyer. This is curated vulnerability where authenticity becomes a mask so convincing even the wearer believes it. There's nothing inherently wrong with expressing feelings online, but what's troubling is how strategically emotions are used, not to connect, but to control the narrative. Tears followed by affiliate links, breakups followed by brand deals, self-love quotes followed by a thirst trap. The line between self-expression and soft control begins to blur. Now let's talk about the rise of performative self-love. A movement once rooted in radical self-acceptance has morphed into something eerily commercial. Self-care becomes justification for disengagement. Boundaries become shields for passive aggression. Self-worth becomes a coded way of saying I get to decide when you suffer. And no one calls it manipulation because it's wrapped in empowerment. But when strength is used to avoid responsibility, when healing becomes an excuse to emotionally ghost, breadcrumb, or play victim, what you're seeing isn't growth. It's a refined form of control. Not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. So ask yourself, are these behaviors truly expressions of identity? Or are they responses to an environment that rewards suggestion over clarity, ambiguity over honesty, appearance over substance? In many cases, manipulation is not taught explicitly. It's absorbed through reward. From a young age, many women learn that being direct gets labeled as rude, but subtle control is admired. That silence can sting louder than words. That a perfectly timed post can deliver more emotional power than any argument ever could. And over time, performance becomes identity. The performance is not the mask. It becomes the self. This is not a condemnation. It's a confrontation. Modern femininity has been shaped by survival, social media, and the silent algorithms of approval. And many who wield its tools aren't doing so maliciously. They're doing what works, what gets results, what keeps them seen. But let's not pretend it isn't power, and let's not pretend it doesn't manipulate. Because today, the most powerful hand is often the one you never see moving but feel guiding everything. Emotional warfare in relationships. Approximately 500 words. In romantic relationships, we imagine manipulation as something loud, yelling, threats, ultimatums. But some of the most powerful forms of control never raise their voice. They whisper in sighs, in silence, in the look that says everything and nothing. This is emotional warfare, and it rarely looks like war. It begins with expectation, disguised as love. If you really cared, you'd know what I need. No request, no clarity, just the unspoken belief that true love means mind reading. It sounds romantic, even poetic, but what it creates is a minefield of failure. Every unmet need becomes a test you never knew you were taking, and every mistake becomes proof that you're not enough. Then comes the withdrawal of warmth, the quiet punishment. No yelling, just distance, a colder tone, fewer touches. You ask, is everything okay? They say, I'm fine, but they're not. And you know it? This tactic isn't accidental. It's a way to enforce control without confrontation by making your nervous system do the work. You start walking on eggshells, analyzing every word, every action, trying to earn back what was once freely given. That's not love. That's behavioral conditioning. And then there's the emotional roller coaster of love bombing and withdrawal. One day you're their world. Affection pours in, compliments, texts, grand gestures. The next, silence, distance, disinterest. You try harder, you blame yourself. You crave the high you once felt, and you'll chase it even if it means tolerating neglect. This isn't just emotional confusion, it's dependency. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward system known to the brain. Now enter the game of comparison. Why can't you be more like him? My ex never had this problem. Other guys would kill to be with me. Each line is a surgical strike targeting confidence, value, masculinity. And with enough of them, a man begins to shrink. Not physically, psychologically. He stops expressing. He stops leading. He starts complying. This is emotional coercion. There are no bruises, no screaming matches, only psychic discomfort so persistent you eventually adapt just to stop feeling it. You become compliant to avoid the cold. You modify yourself to keep the peace. You silence your needs so you don't awaken theirs. And the worst part, It's almost impossible to prove it's happening because it hides behind the language of love. But manipulation doesn't need cruelty. It only needs your willingness to keep chasing the connection, even when it's no longer mutual. The cultural cover-up. Here's the question we're not supposed to ask. Why is this kind of manipulation of autonomous untouchable? Why can we dissect male aggression under microscopes with terms like toxic masculinity, dominance behavior, and emotional unavailability? But when manipulation wears a softer face, we call it charm. Or worse, intuition? A man asserting control is dangerous. A woman doing the same indirectly? That's just how women are. This is the cultural cover-up, and it's hiding in plain sight. Language plays a crucial role. A man who withholds affection is labeled cold, detached, abusive. But when a woman does it, it's framed as protecting her peace. When a man uses strategy in relationships, he's manipulative. When a woman does, she's emotionally intelligent. The same behavior, reframed by gendered expectations, becomes either pathology or poetry. And this bias isn't just in conversation, it seeps into the media, the legal system, even psychological research. Look at romantic comedies, TV dramas, viral TikToks. Jealousy is cute. Emotional manipulation is sassy. Ghosting? She's just protecting her energy. Rarely do we name it for what it is, control disguised as emotional expression. Even in couples therapy, the imbalance persists. Psychologists often zero in on male behavior, tracking anger, avoidance, sexual pressure. But the covert manipulations, emotional coercion, silent treatment, performative vulnerability rarely make it into the treatment plan. Why? Because our culture has coded female influence as natural, not strategic, as nurturing, not dominant. But influence is influence, no matter how softly it's delivered. This isn't about blame, it's about balance. If we only acknowledge power when it's loud, we'll never see the power that operates through silence. And if we refuse to question the systems that excuse it, we're not protecting women, we're protecting invisible control, the mirror of manipulation. Is it all intentional? Not every manipulator knows they're manipulating. Sometimes the mirror of control reflects back generations of conditioning, not conscious strategy. So before we pass judgment, let's ask a deeper question. Is this behavior chosen or inherited? From a young age, many girls are taught a dangerous equation. Directness equals disrespect. Anger equals hysteria. Wanting something out loud makes you too much. But be quiet, be agreeable, be sweet. And suddenly the world responds. Teachers smile, adults reward, boys listen. This is social conditioning, and it runs deep. What starts as survival becomes identity. What begins as compliance morphs into strategy. Over time, many women internalize the idea that their true needs must be hinted at, not spoken. Their influence must be gentle, not obvious. Their power must be hidden, or else it's no longer acceptable. Now imagine living like this for decades. Eventually, emotional manipulation doesn't look like manipulation at all, it looks like normal. This is where learned helplessness becomes a form of power. The silent withdrawal, the performative vulnerability, the I just feel like I'm not heard, when no words were offered in the first place. It's not always deceptive. Sometimes it's protective, a way to maintain dignity without confrontation, a way to regain control in a world that never offered direct authority. And here's the unsettling truth. Many women were never taught another way. They watched their mothers do it, their grandmothers. A cycle of emotional positioning passed down like heirlooms. Not with malice, but with necessity. So yes, manipulation is real, it causes harm, but it's not always chosen. Sometimes it's the only form of influence someone believes they're allowed to have. And that's what makes it so hard to spot and so easy to excuse. But whether it's conscious or not, the effect remains. And if we're brave enough to name it with compassion, not accusation, we create space for something rare, emotional honesty. Power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears a soft voice, a tilted head, a carefully timed silence. It doesn't raise a hand, it raises doubt. It doesn't say, do this. It says, do what you want, with a look that says otherwise. And somehow you find yourself doing it. We've been trained to see control as physical, loud, obvious. But the deepest control isn't about force. It's about influence over emotion. And the most dangerous part? You might never even know it happened. Because the person who influenced your decision never laid a hand on you, never shouted, never demanded. They simply made you feel responsible for their feelings. And that was enough. Now ask yourself how many of your choices were made freely, and how many were nudged by someone who never gave you a clear yes or no, only a pause, a sigh, a sudden withdrawal. That's the power you never noticed, not because you were weak, but because you were empathetic, wired to care, wired to connect, and in that connection vulnerable to soft influence. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness, because only when you see the invisible can you begin to choose freely, to love clearly, to stand firmly. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and once you hear the whisper, you can no longer pretend it wasn't speaking. Right now, there are 2 videos on your screen handpicked just for you. Click to watch them. I'm sure you'll love every second.